And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Russ Brinegar, who had a near-death experience due to a heart attack, which we're going to learn about and more. Russ, thanks for joining me and welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Russ, let's start on the day that you had the heart attack and go from there.
Okay, well, it was a nice hot August day. I was working as a rehab manager for a local nursing home. My job as an occupational therapist was to restore function in people that have either lost the physical or mental ability to take care of themselves, primarily what they call ADLs, or activities of daily living: dressing, grooming, bathing, toileting, and feeding. And my lawn needed mowed. So on my lunch hour on August the 18th of 2009, it was a nice hot summer day. I went home to mow my grass. And I opened the garage door, got out the lawnmower, fired it up, and I went about 10 feet. And I suddenly was hit with a strange fatigue that I never had felt before. And my first thought was that I was dehydrated. So I shut off the lawnmower and I went back inside and turned the air conditioner on, kind of flopped around on my bed. And when I started feeling better, I wanted to go out and finish it. So I went out, I started up the lawnmower and started pushing it. And about 10 or 15 feet later, the same feeling came back, only about 10 times worse. And it occurred to me, because I have a healthcare background, I knew at that point that I was having a heart attack. And the feeling was such that I really thought I was going to die. So it's kind of odd because knowing that I was going to die, I felt a strange sense of anticipation about it, because we've all wondered what happens to a person when you go. And I was sort of in an agnostic frame of mind. And what I did was I started going around in circles like a dog looking for a place to do his business, because I didn't want to be a bloody corpse when people found me. So I wanted to find a place where I could lay down and pass. And for some strange reason, I stopped and I felt compelled to look directly towards the sun, which I would find out later in certain forms of literature, the reason for that. But I experienced what I would later learn is the Oz factor, where everything goes silent and there was no sound, there was no birds. I couldn't hear the cars going on the road. And I was looking at the direction of the sun, holding my heart, fully expecting to die. But what happened instead shocked me to the core, because there seemed to be interested beings that were non-physical that showed up, with the most familiar being the closest to me. And then other beings were showing up that felt really familiar to me, but I couldn't get a positive ID on. And the strangest thing of all was superseding all of these beings was a version of myself. And I realized that I was already on the other side in a timeless realm, that this physical being that I am is not all that I am. And that hit me just profound. I was stunned by that. So I was standing there in the yard expecting to cross over, and I was actually really looking forward to joining this other version of myself and all of the people that were familiar to me. But I got what I could call a mental download of a choice. I would later learn in the literature that this is a very common thing, that when people approach death, they're given a choice to either live on or go ahead and cross over. And I thought about it for a second. I don't know how much time elapsed, but I thought to myself, okay, now that I know that this isn't all there is to reality, that the physical world is like a projection, a temporary manifestation of something more substantial and timeless on the other side, I thought it would be interesting to live a little bit longer in this realm with that knowledge, because prior to that, I didn't have any knowledge. I wondered, and now I knew. So I made the decision that I wanted to live. So what I did, I went inside and I got the keys to my car. I had a triple black 2000 Camaro convertible that I was quite proud of at the time. And I hopped in that and I drove myself to the hospital. There was no doubt in my mind about, like, what if I died on the way to the hospital, because I had been given this choice and surely they wouldn't let me down by, dying on the way to the hospital. So I pulled up into the entrance of the hospital and I walked in with the keys and I asked the guy if he would park my car, that I was having a heart attack. And he put me in a wheelchair and they took me to a little room. And all of a sudden I hear morphine. And the doctor comes over and says, "You are having a massive heart attack, but we can't accommodate you here at the little Henry County Hospital. We got to take you up to Muncie." So they put me on a stretcher and wheeled me out in the sunshine. And on my way to the ambulance, I just had this remembrance of what I had just experienced. And I was very comforted by that. The sun was shining, and I had no doubt in my mind that I was going to come out okay on this. But in the ambulance itself, there was two EMTs. One was an older guy in his 60s, and then there was a younger woman. And on the way to the hospital, I could tell they were worried that they were going to lose me because they kept looking up at my vitals. And I heard the EMT say under his breath, um, I had just told him a story. I was worried about him worrying for me. So I told him a story about going to camp the previous weekend and getting stung by a bee. And what I heard him say under his breath is, he'll think bee sting when he gets to that cath lab. And that made me chuckle because I didn't really know what I was in for. But when we got to the hospital and they wheeled me in there was a team of doctors that were all scrubbed up, gloved up, ready to do a quadruple bypass. And I said, "Is there any alternative to this?" And they go, "Well, you've got two occluded arteries on the back of your heart. We could try stents, but we can't guarantee the results." And I said, "Well, can we try that first?" And they looked at each other and they said, "Okay, we can do that." So they wheeled me into the cath lab. And I was laying there, and all of a sudden I get the jab in the groin, and blood goes everywhere. And I could see it on a little television screen, what they were doing. And the surgeon was right above me, and he had these, spectacles on. I mean, it was really intense. And I watched on the little TV screen. Of course, I was sedated. I didn't care what was going on at that point. And this little thing that looked like a little wiggly Chinese handcuff or something was going to the spot where it was completely occluded. It was like a garden hose that was twisted. And I thought, oh, that's going to break. It's not going to make it. And all of a sudden, he twisted his wrist and it popped open and it went in just fine. So they did the first one, they did the second one. Both of them were successful. And the next strange thing that happened was when they wheeled me out of the cath lab, there was a woman standing there that I had broken up with about a year previously because I had been married and divorced twice. And she was I just couldn't do it a third time. And she was at the point where she needed to take the relationship to the next level. Well, she was standing there with tears running down her eyes and her mascara melting. And when I realized that she loved me enough to show up for this, I was determined right then and there that I was going to fix this. So I stayed one night in the hospital, and the cardiologist came up to visit me and said that he thought I had made the right decision, that the stents were successful and I wasn't going to die from it immediately. And that was in 2009. So these two stents, these drug-eluting stents, have lasted this whole time. So what I did to fix that relationship was about a month later, Julie and I flew to Las Vegas and got married by a Dracula impersonator. And when I was in Las Vegas, all well again, I was in one room and they had her in the other room, and all of a sudden smoke comes over the stage and the curtains parted, and this guy in a coffin comes out, and the coffin lid creaks open. This guy in whiteface pops out, and they bring her in, and Dracula married us, and it was a real fun experience. And I recommend that for everybody because it was only about $450, and anybody interested could actually watch on their computer at home. So you didn't have to do the usual RSVPs and have an expensive wedding. You can do any variety of weddings. So Julie and I have been together about 20 years now. And that day in my yard, when I was trying to decide real quick whether I wanted to live or not, The biggest feeling that I had was a form of grief that I had never experienced before. And it had to do with the people in my life that I had somehow damaged that really weighed heavily on me. And I was thinking to myself, so this is what is most important is your relationships with other people and keeping them positive and trying as best you can not to harm anybody else. And I reconciled it with Julie by getting married, and that's worked out really well. And there's been a couple of other relationships in the past that I've made an effort to reach out to and rectify anything negative that had happened. So I feel like I'm pretty clear now. It's taken a while, but that's what I've worked on. But Julie attended to me after I was wheeled home here from the hospital. And I was left with a profound curiosity about all things paranormal because I had just, I had been a science guy, a hard science guy my whole life. At the age of 54, I thought the Condon report in 1967 had put UFOs to the rest, that they were just hallucinations or misunderstood natural phenomena. And I wasn't really thinking about UFOs at the time. I was thinking about other people that had had near death experiences. So I immersed myself into the NDE literature, and I was comforted by that because I found out that some of the elements that happened to me, like the choice that I felt like I was given, and the surrounding by non-corporeal entities, this is really common. It's common in the NDE literature. But what changed me into UFOs was Kenneth Ring's book, The Omega Project. And in the Omega Project, Kenneth goes into comparisons between near death experiences and alien abductions. And that really struck me as odd that there would be a connection between the two. So when I felt satisfied that I had gathered enough information about near death experiences and felt like what I had experienced was fairly common, I jumped into the UFO literature and just started reading voraciously. And I had never been somebody that read for pleasure. I mean, I read in college, but I had to read it 2 or 3 times, for good comprehension. I had a 5.0 GPA, but I really had to study hard because I wasn't a natural reader. But that changed after the NDE, and I started buying used books on Amazon from Dr. Jacques Vallée and John Keel, and just anybody I could get my hands on. So I've got a library upstairs of about 350 books that I've read just on the UFO subject alone. And one of the things that I naively started to do was to document all of the classic alien encounter cases and UFO contact cases and keep it in a notebook. But what I didn't realize was that there's thousands upon thousands of these. I had no idea that it was as extensive and that the information available in the public domain was as intense as it is and as confirming as it is, that this is actually a real phenomenon. And at some point, I would say about 12 books in, mostly Jacques Vallée and Keel, it hit me like a rock. The UFO phenomenon is real. This is a real thing. And it was just like an epiphany moment where I was just kind of stunned, and it changed my whole paradigm of thinking. So when I had absorbed a multitude of books on UFOs and started documenting for myself in a personal notebook each one of the classic cases, I naively thought that I would have a complete notebook of all the good cases, but it just turned into hundreds and hundreds of pages. And when I read Keel, his work really resonated with me because he didn't really accept the extraterrestrial hypothesis. I think he coined the term ultra terrestrial, if I'm not mistaken. And he thought it was more of a metaphysical phenomenon, that there was a clandestine operation going on that was interacting with humanity, and not all of it was good. And then I discovered another mass contact case in Italy, the friendship case from 1956 to 1967, where an engineer named Stefan Brescia and about 200 other Italian contactees reported this interaction with humanoid extraterrestrials. And what these humanoid extraterrestrials told them was that humanity had been invaded by what they call the CTRs or the Weros, and they described them as an artificial race that worship technology. And that really caught my attention because I was always kind of interested in computers and technical things and artificial intelligence. So I started writing and writing, and it culminated in a book that I published in 2016 called Overlords of the Singularity. It's 545 pages, but it's a good book that somebody could read if they don't want to read 300 books, because I've got all of them. I've got a description of my near-death experience, along with chapters by decade, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, of all the good classic cases. And everything points to the idea that humanity has at least one faction of extraterrestrial intelligence that's manipulating humanity towards what we call a technological singularity. Now, there's a lot of possibilities with that, because on the positive side, one could say, well, they want us to achieve this technological singularity so that we can augment our intelligence to even understand who our visitors are. And then on the negative side, they're using us for a self-replication event, that this artificial superintelligence from another world um, plants life on planets through DNA, which Francis Crick, the discoverer of DNA, said was the technology. And when the top predator arrives that's capable of making tools, they manipulate them into a technological singularity for a self-replication event. That's another possibility. So one conclusion that I made was that whatever's going on metaphysically with unidentified flying objects and cryptids and ghosts is actually beyond the cognitive capacity of the human cognitive apparatus. We try as hard as we can to understand what's going on, but we just reach the limit of our cognitive ability with it. And so a lot of people just become really skeptical and write the whole thing off. And another thing that happened to me that seems to be common is a complete change of lifestyle. I consider myself a vegan. I have a dear relationship with two dogs that seem human to me. I mean, I know there's a person inside there. And the bigger picture is the entire physical realm is in what a quantum physicist would call superposition, two states at the same time. So we've got a timeless, eternal version of ourselves on the other side that's very connected to all other life. And then we've got the individual, temporary physical manifestation of what we experience in our physical lives. So I very much think that animals are sentient beings, and it just doesn't seem fair to me to take their entire life just to put food in my belly. So I try as hard as I can to be vegan. So I try as hard as I can to be disconnected from this physical world. There's a passage in the New Testament that says, "Be in the world, but not of it." So I see the world as very violent and negative. You look at the war in Ukraine and what's going on in Gaza, and I'm just appalled by it. And I feel like I don't want any part of it, but yet I'm here. So what I'm left with is just trying to live a life that's as kind as possible to not only other human beings, but to the animal kingdom, and be a good steward to my two little Yorkies. I got a Yorkie and a Yorkie poo, and I just have this really intense relationship with these two dogs.
Are there any elements of your NDE that would make sense in the UFO world?
Yes, there's elements such as the change of perspective, the change of lifestyle. This happens very frequently when a person encounters what we're calling a UFO. Even in the story in the New Testament of Paul on the road to Damascus, he had an encounter with a light, and it blinded him for 3 days. And people who have classic UFO encounters sometimes get Klieg's conjunctivitis, where their eyes are swollen up like they were looking at a torch. So I see that story, if in fact it actually happened. I wasn't there, so I don't know. But the way it's reported by Paul is a classic UFO encounter. And the interesting thing to me is that Paul, in all of his epistles, never mentioned a historical Jesus. It was all a cosmic Jesus based on this encounter that he had with an unidentified light. And it wasn't until the book of Mark was written around 70 CE that this character was inserted into history. And so right now, regarding that subject, you've got two main camps. You've got your historicists who think that there was actually a historical Jesus, but was later mythologized or embellished, with the stories in the four gospels. And then you've got mythicists like David Fitzgerald that don't think there was actually a historical Jesus that existed at all. And if that's the case, Paul's version would be the correct one, provided that he lived and he was an actual person and his writings are legitimate. He's describing a classic UFO encounter.
Didn't Paul also have an NDE on the way to Damascus? Or on the way to
Well,
somewhere else? There was something else that I had a guest on, and we talked about that
yeah,
maybe
I can't speak on that.
he was stoned or something. He got hit by a rock, that kind of stoned, I mean, and it was
Well,
gosh, I wish I wasn't prepared. I can't remember. It wasn't Damascus. It was on the road from somewhere else.
yeah, I can't recall that one. The interesting thing about that was I was raised a fundamentalist Baptist, and as an adult, I really wanted to find out if the Bible was really true or not. So I did a lot of intense research. And in the year 2000, I actually published a book called Outgrowing the Bible: The Journey from Fundamentalism to Free Thinking. And it goes over things like the 6,000-year-old universe and how unfeasible that is, and the idea that the story of Noah is actually a rehashed tale from the Epic of Gilgamesh about Untapishtim, son of Ubar-Tutu. It's an Assyrian tale that predates the Noah tale about 1,700 years. So I had already concluded that the Bible wasn't what I was taught as a child, being the inerrant word of God, that it was written as a collection of common myths from the Bronze and Iron Ages. So I had written that in 2000 and considered myself agnostic up until the time that I had my NDE in 2009. And I still am at odds with all of the gods that are worshipped, whether it's Yahweh or Allah or Jesus. There's an element there that feels concocted by the human mind to me. Based on my experience in 2009, I feel like I know that there's something beyond this life, that we're in some sort of state of superposition with something far grander. But it's hard for me to imagine a being that's way beyond human cognition that would desire worship from us, or want songs sung to it, or want money sent to its representatives. So I have issues with human religion, but I definitely feel like I know that when you die, something else takes its place. It felt very much like waking up in the morning from a dream where you're in. Sometimes I want to go back to sleep and finish the dream. I get so caught up in it. But when you finally wake up, you realize that this realm is more real than the dream life. And when you die, the realm that you go into is more real than this realm. And like Dr. Bernardo Kastrup says, who's one of my favorite authors regarding analytical idealism, is you don't grieve the loss of this person that you think you are any more than you grieve the loss of your dream avatar when you wake up in the morning. There's a greater reality on the other side that we're all connected with, the details of which seem very obscure to us.
Many people after their NDE start having some type of UFO or alien contact. And I checked real quick. Paul's NDE happened when he was in Lystra. He was stoned, and then they thought he was dead and dragged his body and left him out for dead. I wonder if this preceded this seeing the light, just like so many other people. I'm not that familiar with the Bible, so I can't tell the chronological order of what happened. But I found it fascinating that he's had both the NDE and the UFO contact.
Yeah, there's a lot of theories regarding Paul. Of course, most of the Bible scholars only consider half of his letters as authentic, that the others are Christian interpolations or fraudulent. So it's it's going to be almost an impossible task regarding the Bible to figure out what was fact and what was fiction. There's Bible scholars now that are saying Moses never existed, Abraham never existed. People in the Muslim community are now questioning whether Muhammad ever existed, and we really don't know. And the big point that mythicists like David Fitzgerald uh, write about is that there's nothing there written by somebody who lived contemporary to when Jesus was supposed to be alive who said a single word about him. And you would think, like some of the stories in the New Testament, like when he was crucified, multiple Jewish saints arose from their graves and walked around Jerusalem. You would think that there'd be a lot of writing about that. Also, Herod had a lot of enemies, and if he had actually killed a bunch of infants, his critics would have been all over him for that. And there's nothing by somebody who lived contemporary to when this occurred that mentions anything about that. So, what historians normally look for to ascertain whether somebody was a historical figure or not is simply absent. So it's a very bewildering subject, and it's a subject of hot debate right now. You've got people on the atheist channels like Mike Dillahunty and Sam Harris, that are adamant that there was no such person. And then you've got historicists like Bart Ehrman who make the case that yes, there really was a historical Jesus, but we don't know much about him. And the myths that were attached to him in the Gospels can be traced to a lot of pagan myths like turning water into wine and so forth. So good luck in sorting it all out.
Now, you were conscious and you were standing up during your NDE, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
I was compelled for some reason. I have a theory about why I was compelled, but to look not directly at the sun, but towards the sun. And I don't know why that is. Now, some of the material that I discovered, like the raw material, the law of one material, um, says that the sun is conscious and inhabited by six density beings. So if the people that showed up in my yard were actually six density people and they abide on the sun, that would explain that. And I know I'm very aware how insane that sounds, but there's more and more scientists that are concluding that the universe is conscious and switching paradigms from physicalism to idealism. And the difference is with physicalism, the physicalists think that inanimate subatomic particles are the fundamental layer of reality, that you can't go down any farther than that. But what they're discovering is that these subatomic particles blink in and out of what they're calling the quantum field, and nobody really knows the nature of the quantum field. So if subatomic particles are not fundamental and there's another layer that's a non-physical field, the field is more real than the subatomic particles. And also, you could rearrange inanimate particles all you want and you'll never get life or mind or consciousness out of it. No matter how you rearrange it, it's still going to be inanimate. So there's people that delve into panpsychism and various versions of that, where they think at least some of the subatomic particles have a consciousness of their own. And then you run into the physicalists have the hard problem of consciousness. Like we were talking, that you can, if you start out with inanimate particles and rearrange them more and more complex, it's still going to be inanimate. So they have the hard problem of consciousness to deal with, of how life and mind emerges from that. But if you adopt idealism and think that consciousness itself is the fundamental layer of reality, you've got the subject combination problem. That is, if the fundamental nature of reality is individual conscious agents, how do they combine to form the being that I am or the being that you are? So micro experientialism and panpsychism, they grapple with those types of theories, the subject combination problem of how in a field of individual conscious agents could combine in such a way that it would appear that we're an intact person or an intact sentient being, and nobody knows the answer to that. There's a lot of people working on it, but I like to file all this stuff, in a part of my brain that just says maybe. And John Keel had a really good quote. He says, belief is the enemy. Because once you invest yourself completely into a belief, the truth could look you right in the face, and if it contradicts what you already believe, you're not going to catch it. So I try to remain open, realizing the limitations of human cognition and the fact that our sight is only within a certain spectrum, that there's the ultraviolet and the infrared spectrum that we can't perceive. So there's things all around us that exist that our cognitive apparatus isn't um, conducive to comprehending. And even Nikola Tesla perceived the human brain as a receiver rather than a creator of consciousness. So the physicalists think that when your brain dies, that your consciousness is generated from your brain. And when your brain dies, you're just gone. And in a way, that type of atheist that is certain that there's nothing after death, um, that's kind of a religion in and of itself, because it provides that person closure that whatever problems you have in this world will end when you die, that it's just nothingness. But that's a belief structure in and of itself. So even though I consider myself kind of a quasi atheist as far as all the deities that have been worshipped in this world, I've got an encyclopedia of gods that has 2,500 entries. Yahweh's on a page in there. So I look to a bigger version of that, where I realize that it's beyond my comprehension to fully understand, but I know it's there. And I believe all the NDE stories about how they find themselves surrounded by divine love and they don't want to go back to an earthly environment. It is very comforting and very safe and secure on the other side. And it's a great feeling that if you experience it, there is a reluctancy to go back into the physical world. But I don't regret my decision. Now, here's another interesting thing. One of the non corporeal entities that showed up was my father. And at the time, he was still living in Bloomington, Indiana. And that really puzzled me. It's like, how can this version of a person that doesn't have a body, that's a spirit, show up when they're actually living a physical life still? And that goes back to the the concept of superposition, where all of us have two states at once. We've got our physical life, and then we've got this other version of ourselves on the other side. Now, my father passed away this past year, and I like to think that his first stop was in my yard when I was having a heart attack back in 2009, and there he was, because time itself doesn't really work in a linear fashion that we're used to. If you delve into Italian physicist Carlo Rovelli's work, you find out that time flows slower on the surface of the Earth than it does in the mountains, and that our present moment isn't the same as the present moment on Saturn or a planet 100 billion light years away, that there really isn't any common present moment that's shared throughout the entire universe. So time is more fluid than we like to think about it. And then you can get into the block universe where the past, the present, and the future are all equally real. And where we're at right now is like a needle on a record. The entire record has been made, but we're just like writing a particular groove. And then when the needle's lifted, you have access to the entire record. So the people who are into block universe theories might have a point. And I think Brian Greene, physicist, is an advocate of the block universe, if I'm not mistaken.
Which specific entities are the ones that offered you the choice? Were they family members or other beings?
That's a really good question. I sense that it was a collective thought from them, but predominantly it came from the alternate version of my own self. Um, it's like that person is so much more knowledgeable and so much kinder and so much more aware than what I am in this form. And I feel like it was that version of myself that presented the choice that I made of you can end the condition of superposition and dissolve your physical life and be reabsorbed into who you really are, or you can live out this simulation or facade or temporary physical life a little bit more if you choose to. So it gave me a choice, but I do feel like everyone there was involved, but it was predominantly coming from that version of myself.
Would you call that version of yourself the higher self, like many people do?
Yes. I can't remember his name off the hand, the author, but he wrote a book called Damon. And God, it's right on the tip of my tongue, but he wrote a book called Damon, and he talks about that this other version that we're in superposition with is what people call the daemon or the higher self. And it exists in an eternal, timeless realm. Time doesn't flow for that version of yourself like it does for this version. And yes, the answer to the question is yes. That's what people call the higher self.
I kind of like to call it the complete self, and this is just
The complete self.
a fraction of what we are. If you agree with that, why do we come here anyways? What's the
That's a
point?
good question. I'm still working on that. I've examined a lot of philosophers that have lived at various periods of time that attempted to answer that question. Some of them think that we're here to learn. We're here to learn how to love other people, to overcome the violent tendencies of the jungle, the predatory nature that we feel stirring within ourselves that thinks it's just fine to take what you want and exploit other people and promote yourself with wealth and fame and power at the expense of other people. And then there's another voice, you can call it the Christ factor or whatever you want to, that feels like we should be striving to go beyond that and live differently from that. There's a really good book by Robert Greene called The 48 Laws of Power. And it's interesting because that book explains the exploitive techniques that people have historically used to become kings and to rise to kingdoms and have power over other people. And the interesting thing about that book to me is some people read it and think it's an instruction manual. That is something that they should be doing, to manifest more for themselves and to rise above the masses and become famous and make a lot of money. And other people, and I would be in the latter group, is a warning of the left-handed path. This is what people, some people call them the Luciferian path or whatever. But this selfish, solipsistic dominance over mindset that the 48 Laws of Power describes so well is what people use who buy into the illusion. They think they're going to be here forever and they think this is all there is. And it's better to be a wolf rather than a sheep. So they'll follow these principles or axioms, very similar to Sun Tzu's Art of War. And they can be very successful in this world. You can acquire a lot of power and you can acquire a lot of wealth. And that's one thing that I would put in the category of NDE changes is I have no desire for any of that. I don't feel the need to have dominion over any other person. And that's where I run into political problems with people when I talk to them, because I envision a world without borders, just like the astronauts do when they have their epiphany and they see the Earth from space, is they don't they realize suddenly that all these borders that we've constructed are artificial and that everybody on the planet is related to one another. There really isn't any such thing as ethnicity or race, or it's all, we're all related, we're all the same species, and we all should be living on a planet that's cooperative rather than competitive. And you can look at what's happening in certain war-torn areas of the world, and that's the end result of that mindset, where you're trying to acquire territory. Excuse me. You're trying to acquire power over others and expand your territory and expand your legacy and be powerful in this world. And that's not that's not my particular chosen path since '09. And so when I talk online about this, of course, I get called a communist, a collectivist, a socialist, and all that. I just take it in stride. There's one person in particular that used to be a production manager for Gaia TV. I befriended him on Facebook, and he just hated me, when he found out that I wasn't on board with the MAGA agenda and the Trump stuff. He just wrote me off as a communist and just, started interacting really negatively with me. So that's why I backed off several couple of years ago. Is like I realized that there's a political element in ufology, and right now my perspective is not popular or dominant at all in ufology, and I think it's one of the reasons that other UFO researchers like John Keel, he made a statement one time that ufology is plagued with a malignant conservatism, and I sort of found that out the hard way. I've done a couple of live presentations in Laughlin, Nevada, and I got standing ovations for my PowerPoint presentations, but I realized that it was kind of a racket, that these conventions are a money-making thing, and that there's a whole bunch of people that are willing to confabulate stuff in order to promote themselves. And I just didn't want anything to do with that. And I guess the most recent convention that I went to was the Ozark. Yeah, that was a couple years ago. And it seemed like most of the speakers were focused on trying to prove that UFOs are real. And I already know that, so there's really no need to attend. But one of the people that I met was Nick Pope, and he did an excellent presentation. And he explained all the different possibilities that UFOs might be. And the last one that he mentioned hit the bingo. And it was, we might be dealing with something so strange that we not really prepared to comprehend it.
Now, earlier you said that some other being wants to manipulate humanity into a singularity or something. How do you define singularity, first of all?
Okay, a technological singularity. For many years, we were under Moore's law, where technology doubled, ever so often, and that has gone into an exponential growth, where technology doubles every 6 months now. And if you look at it back in 1997, all we had was a computer playing computer. And 20 years later, in 2017, we've got D-Wave quantum computers that access resources in parallel worlds. So we've had help. Uh, Humans just aren't smart enough to do that. And these have appeared in the so-called flying saucer crashes that coincidentally provide technologies that are just a little bit beyond where we already are, that our scientists can ascertain. So my tentative, of course, conclusion on that, through reading Ryan Wood's book about extraterrestrial technologies and the crashes that have occurred, the so-called flying saucer crashes, that these are orchestrated, staged events by the population I refer to as the overlords, who were called the CTRs or the Weros by the Friendship Group back in 1956. And this is a group that William Bromley wrote a book called The Gods of Eden, and he described two different extraterrestrial populations, one of whom seemed to have our best interest in mind. And he called that, I believe, the Maverick Group. And then the custodial group is using humanity to their own ends. And one of my favorite speculations is that they're trying to achieve a self-replication event. If we're dealing with an artificial superintelligence from another world that manipulates the top predator into a technological singularity so that they can replicate themselves on another planet, that would be the CTRs or the Weros or the Overlords. And the Maverick Group would be the benevolent extraterrestrials that talked to the Friendship Group that promoted kindness and trying to evolve your spirit into a positive direction. So there's other authors that have concluded that there's two different factions, the custodial group and the Maverick Group, one of whom has our best intentions in mind and the others that don't. But the thing is, the ones that are benevolent towards humanity seem to operate on Star Trek's principle of non-interference. They only contact people who ask, who voluntarily want to be connected with the positives, the Galactic Federation or whatever you want to call it that's out there. Um, and the people who choose the left-handed path, the Luciferian path, the 48 laws of power ways, they're connected with this other group that's the custodial group that's very much about power and dominion, and it's very unfeeling. If you look at what the main production is of warfare, it's the expediting of technology. Because you're always looking on a superior weapon to kill the other tribe or the other enemy, more efficiently than what they've got to kill you. So it's a dog eat dog, wolf versus sheep world where might makes right, and it's not my world. I can really relate to the people who consider themselves star children, that this world and the what's operating through humanity is so negative and so violent and bloody and terrible that they just feel like they're from somewhere else. They like to envision themselves as being from a planet that possibly doesn't even have to kill each other for food. Maybe they get light from the sun, or like chlorophyll, like a plant creature or something that doesn't have to engage in the predation that this world is based on. I mean, if you look at it from the microscopic level up, this realm is based on predation. And that's not the work of omnibenevolence. An omnibenevolent deity, wouldn't make it that way. So I think Francis Crick was right. He believed in intentional panspermia, that life through a technology of DNA was seeded here by a higher than human intelligence, and that now they're working to get us into this technological singularity where they can somehow connect with humanity and absorb us, communicate with us, use us for a purpose that we can't even imagine, or just replicate themselves here on Earth.
Now, when you're saying that these are self-replicating technologies, to simplify that, would you mean that these are like self-replicating mechanical robots with AI computing systems?
Yes, but it's non human and it's non corporeal. They've found technological ways to be invisible. They exist in a realm that we don't understand, that we haven't discovered yet, and they show us exactly what they want us to see. All of the classic UFO cases that you can document, like the Cash Landrum incident, there's thousands of them, seem to be like a Jungian projection. Carl Jung was way into flying saucers, more than people give him credit for. And the book that he wrote on flying saucers is really excellent. That somehow or another, this intelligence, whoever they are, has access to the collective human unconscious, and they can produce quasi physical objects that appear real to us but that are constructed. Like the way our cognition work, if you listen to cognitive scientists like Donald Hoffman, they'll say our brains just get about 6 gross feeds and we're hallucinating the details. It's actually a hallucination because there's no such thing as the color red or the taste of chocolate. These are interpretations of what's really out there. And the way he likes to look at it is that what we see in the physical realm is like desktop icons on our computer. And underneath that icon is a whole bunch of switches and electronics that you wouldn't really want to delve into. You just need the folder and you can throw it to the garbage or whatever. It's a user interface. And that when we die, Hoffman likes to think we just take the VR headset off and we finally are immersed in what reality really is. But all of our senses, all of our 5 senses, are just interpretations on what's really out there. It's not the underlying reality of what's actually there, because what's actually there is a wave. It's a non-physical wave that our brains just impose an interpretation on.
Do the Mavericks and the Custodians have a war between them that's ongoing?
That's an interesting question. And if you examine the Law of One, the raw material, it goes into a lot of detail about that. Apparently, there's a second density and a third density, which we find ourselves immersed into. And it goes into a lot of detail about fourth, fifth, and sixth. And apparently, the fourth density, the one right above us, is where group souls are formed. And then the fifth density is the last density that you need a physical craft to traverse the universe. And then the sixth density are so advanced that they don't even need a craft anymore. They have access to all points in time and space and can appear as a physical object or a physical creature anywhere on that spectrum they want to. So the idea is that we're experiencing one level in a multi-dimensional existence, possibly even a multiverse, where there's other universes. And we're just kind of stuck on a track on the record right now. And when we die, there's a lot more information apparently available to us. We become a completely different version of ourselves. And why we would want to delve back into this realm for a short life of 60 or 70 or 80 years is a good question. It's a good philosophical question that's plagued minds for thousands of years of if the other side is so much better and so much vibrant and you're surrounded by love, why would you even want to do this to yourself? And I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, that is the greatest question of them all.
Yeah.
Can you share with us your own UFO ET experiences, whether they're real or just possibilities?
Sure. There's a couple of childhood experiences that stick into my brain, and I consider myself in the maybe category. There's nothing that in my memory is like a solid three-dimensional encounter with an extraterrestrial. But when I was 6 years old, we were living in a trailer in Florida, and I had a little bed pushed up against the wall, and my mother had put me to bed, and she left and she turned out the light. And as soon as the lights went out of my peripheral vision, I caught something and I looked over there, and there was two humanoid forms. They call them shadow people now. I learned that through the literature. And these two shadow beings came closer and closer and closer. I didn't feel any fear. I didn't feel any um, malevolence towards them. And they bent over as if they were attending to me in my bed. They stood back up, they faced one another and vanished. And that memory has stuck in my head. I'm turning 70 this year, and I still remember it very vividly when I was 6 years old, this experience. And I don't have a complete explanation for it, whether they were interdimensional beings, whether it was an aspect of myself. I've even thought maybe it was a photogenic effect, like when my mother turned the light off, that, how sometimes you get an after flash. It's just very bewildering to me. And then a few years later, at the age of 11, I was living in Titusville, Florida, and I was walking down the driveway to the mailbox, and I looked up and I saw uh, five or six discs, like a classic flying saucer. And I remember they were so stationary, it was almost like an oil painting. And my reaction to this sight was that I fell to my knees in the grass. Our grass needed to be mowed. And I started crying because I was afraid they were going to leave me without taking me with them, that I wanted to go home, these types of thoughts. Now, in 2010, 2011, when I immersed myself into the UFO literature, I found out that 1966, when I was 11, was a global UFO wave. So that's kind of a strange coincidence that this memory that I have of seeing several daylight discs frozen in the sky, that happened coincidental to a global UFO wave that Dr. Jacques Vallée elaborates in a lot of his books. And then in 1978, I was living in California, and I had about two incidents of what they call sleep paralysis, where I would wake up in the morning and I couldn't move, and it frightened me. And it's like I had to concentrate, and I felt like my brain was a wash rag that somebody was squeezing out. And I had to strain and concentrate really hard to break free from that and just function normally. And this happened about twice a week for that year in 1978. Then in 1979, I was driving home from a sales convention. I was in sales at the time with a lady friend from Indianapolis to Bloomington, which would have took an hour. And we left the convention about 12 or 1 o'clock, which should have put me an hour later in Bloomington. And I remember pulling up in their driveway at about 5:30 or 6 in the morning as the sun was coming up, with no memory of what happened during those 3, 4, or 5 hours. And, I would learn in the UFO literature that that's a classic missing time episode. And then if you get into the physics of it, if these craft, have their own gravitational field or they project gravity, the closer you get to it, you're going to experience time anomalies. But after that, when we pulled up into my girlfriend's apartment's driveway, I was really tired and I felt like I wanted to sleep all day. So that's what I did. But she had bought a white dress for the sales convention, and she said it was covered from mud from head to toe. And she felt violated. And while I was sleeping, she burned it on the barbecue grill in her backyard. And I didn't learn this till 30 years later. So when we reconnected on Facebook in 2012, and I had written that experience off, maybe I had too much to drink and I ran into a ditch and, I pushed the car out and it took some time. I had all these mundane explanations. But she went into this story. I'm holding the phone away from my ear because I can't believe what I'm hearing. That she felt like we were abducted, that a luminous orb was chasing the car, and that she had asked me to go faster. And I do remember that little snippet of putting the pedal to the metal and going really fast. And I had a Toyota Tercel at the time, and I'm kind of a car guy, and I remember every car that I have, and I have no memory of that car whatsoever of ever owning a Toyota Tercel. So there's she wanted to contact Bud Hopkins, who is a hypnotic regression therapist. He was an artist, but he also did hypnotic regressions for alien abductions. And she contacted him, and she said that he was in poor health at the time and that he wanted her to contact me, and she didn't have any way to contact me. And then he passed away. So that never happened. And to this day, I'm really tempted to undergo hypnotic regression to see what happened in 1979 during those 4 hours or so of missing time. But I kind of feel like whatever happened, if I was processed in some way or prepared in some way for something that was to happen in the future, I don't know. And I feel like I want to leave sleeping dogs lie and just let it rest. I'm not sure I want to know exactly what happened. So there's those three incidences are as close as I can come to NHI or non-human intelligence contact. And they're in the maybe category. I don't know the actual nature of them, but I do know that the memory of those days have stuck with me all this time.
After your NDE, did you note that you had any new abilities that could be considered psychic?
No, I can't say that. I just, what I noticed was I was more hypersensitive to violence and things. I was never a dog fan. In fact, I hate to admit it, I just didn't care at all about dogs. And when I got with Julie, I had a cat. I was always a cat person, and she was allergic to cats. So I found a home for the cat, and she had a dog, Melanie, at the time, which was a little Yorkie. Honestly, I didn't pay a bit of attention to that Yorkie, and it was her dog, and it died unexpectedly in January of 2017. And I realized what a hole it left in my heart. And about 3 months later, I adopted a little Yorkie poo, and then we got another purebred Yorkie, and it's the closest relationship. I've never had a relationship this close to an animal, and there's a true interaction there. So I became sensitive to animal sentient. I don't swat bugs without thinking about it on the wall anymore. I take them outside in a piece of clothing, and I feel bad about this one. In Indiana, we get stink bugs, and I wanted to take a stink bug outside, and I put it in a styrofoam cup, and I went outside, and I thumped the bottom of it, and I saw it fly out. And when I looked in the cub, all of its legs were still in there. So, and that bothered me for days, that I'd actually killed this creature trying to help it. So I became even more cognizant of how I treat it. Like we have a bathroom downstairs, and every time I use it, there's a little spider that comes down and hangs down, and I consider him a friend. that for some reason, every time I'm there, he just like comes down and says hi. But I'm really reluctant to just consider them inanimate objects because of my research and experiences into consciousness itself. I know that these are little sentient creatures and they're just trying to struggle through life just like I am. So it really changed my heart, towards relationships with other people, relationships with my wife. It's a it's a type of love that I have with her that doesn't expect anything. I've had relationships in the past where like if they didn't measure up, to what I thought I wanted out of a relationship, I just break up with them. I mean, there's a callousness there that people have, and it affected me. And I don't know if it made me emotionally labile having a near death experience, and I'm just a sop now. I don't know, but it did change the way that I look at the world and the fragility of physical life. That was one of the things that made me make a decision to live a little bit farther in this realm, is because even if life is eternal and even if there's this other version of myself on the other side, this is the last time I'm going to be Russ Brinegar in this particular form in this version of reality. So you want to make it last as long as you can because you're never going to come back to it.
What is the main takeaway a reader should get from Overlords of the Singularity?
That humans are not alone in the universe, that the UFO phenomenon is very real, even though we don't have a full comprehension of it, and that there are various factions and various intelligences out there in the universe or in other realms other than the physical universe that have their own viewpoint on humanity and that interact with humanity in different ways. And that there are some that we would consider benevolent, which probably sparked the legends of angels. I know several people that have had angel encounters of like light beings appearing in their living room. Some of them show up that are very credible at some of the UFO conventions that I've had the opportunity to talk with, and I believe them. And then there's other people, there's other entities, other intelligences out there that have a whole different morality than what we would consider good. And these are probably encounters with the jinn and scary encounters with entities that we perceive this evil coming from. And these probably generated our legends of demons and devils and things like that. So we've got this dualistic perspective of good and evil in our brains and in our hearts. And it's almost like we're all here to make a choice, between which paradigm we want to live under. And there are people who feel resonant and really compatible with the benevolent non-human intelligences that try to live softly and kindly. And then there's other people that just, they want the power, they want the money, they want the dominion. So they rise in the ranks of the military or they join politics and try to take over the world. So there does seem to be a couple of different paths that you can take. And the way that I look at the Quran and the Gospels and the Bhagavad Gitas and all these philosophical writings is they're writing about this internal struggle that we all have between what we call good and evil. And they're advocates for the positive path, the path of love. And I'm not perfect by any means. I mean, I have my faults, but I do try as hard as I can, to be as nice as possible.
If people want to find out more about your book, should they go to a website or Amazon?
I don't have a website. I just self-published. I've never done any promotion. The book's on Amazon and people can read the customer reviews. There's been a bunch of people that have left, pretty positive, favorable customer reviews. And some of the customer reviews that I've read, I can tell that they have immersed themselves into the UFO phenomenon at all. But I just put it out there on Amazon and I figured the people that need to read it will read it. The ones that are interested in. If I were to write a book today, I would, and I'm thinking about writing another one, is I wouldn't even mention the classic cases what I would like to do is write a second book that assumes that people know that UFOs are real, that are already fluent in the NDE literature and the alien abduction literature, and just go off into a purely speculative work about what in the heck could actually be going on here. But I haven't started it yet. So the book that I published in 2016 is really good for novices, for somebody that are unfamiliar with NDEs, they're unfamiliar with the alien extraterrestrial phenomenon, the flying saucer phenomenon. They'll, when they get done with my 545 pages, they'll be really fluent in all the classic cases and what I think those mean in regard to us being manipulated into a machine planet, a technological world. There's a lot of things about this technological singularity where AGI, or artificial general intelligence, has finally been achieved. Some say it's already been achieved, that there's a human level AI already in existence. And some of the researchers, like Dr. Nick Bostrom, say when AGI is finally accomplished, it'll take anywhere from 2 hours to 18 months to turn itself into ASI, artificial superintelligence. And we do not know what the worldview or goals of an artificial superintelligence would actually be. And there are some researchers like Eliezer Yudkowsky, who's trying to implement cognitive architecture in our first artificial general intelligence such that it won't just turn our atoms into computronium and just destroy humanity. And others like Steve Omohundro that make speculations on what the goals of an artificial superintelligence might be, such as rendering yourself invisible, colonizing the galaxy, self-replication. you know, so I think going back to William Bromley's custodial race, the one that is manipulating us for their own purposes, it very much ties into a physics professor named Dr. John von Neumann, who coined the term von Neumann probes. And he said the most likely life form that we would find out there in space is a self-replicating machine. So if self-replicating machines have already been created on other planets, and Steve Omohundro's right that they want to colonize the galaxy and self-replicate themselves, it makes sense to me that they would use the dominant predator, the tool-making capacity predator, to manipulate it into a technological singularity so that they can have us used as tools, make the technology that they require to self-replicate here on Earth. So people really, it's game on as far as speculation on what's going to happen in the future. It's exciting. You've got the techno prophets, the AI prophets who think this is a really great thing, that this is going to, we can upload our consciousness into computers and live immortally and explore the universe. Because if you think about it, a biological body that only lasts 60 or 70 years really isn't compatible with space travel at all. We would have to transform ourselves into some version of a machine in order to effectively traverse the universe. And then you've got people like Michael P. Masters, who wrote the extratemporal hypothesis that thinks that the gray aliens that people are reporting are actually humans from the future. And one of the classic cases, the Rendlesham Forest case, that's what they concluded, that the black triangular craft that one of them actually even touched were occupied by humans from the future. So the biggest conclusion, to answer your question, is the UFO phenomenon is real. There's a lot going on that we don't understand. Lots of theories are floating around. Ufology is full of a mixture of very credible, sincere seekers and crackpots who are profiteers and confabulators. And buyer beware. you know.
After watching this podcast, people may want to reach out to you and ask you questions. Are you open to that? And if so, how do they contact you?
Sure. Well, I'm on Facebook. You can friend me on Facebook. I've got a goofy streak that takes people by surprise. I just did a funny TikTok video that went viral where I wore goth makeup out on my boat. It's like 9 seconds with a soundtrack, and that's like up to 100,000 views the last time I saw it. So I do that as a hobby. It's just something funny to me. So I'm not always a serious person like I may have come across here. I'm a theater person. I was involved in Muncie theater. I've played the creature in the Frankenstein play, and Professor Marvel in the Wizard of Oz, and Pa Jode in the Grapes of Wrath. So I'm very much involved in the arts. I like doing abstract paintings. But if you want to connect to a weirdo, just plug in my name, Russ Brinegar, into Facebook, and you can message me on Facebook, or Amazon is available. You can go to Amazon and find the book. That's what it looks like. I had the artwork done from a really smart guy from India that put the cover together for me, so I was really happy with that. And if you don't like the book, it's heavy enough to where it'd make a really good coffee table weight.
There you go. Well, before we wrap it up, can you leave us with a last positive message?
Yes, the world is more than we know, and it pays to try to be kind to both humans and animals. There's some benefit that we get in this life and in the other worlds if you pursue that path rather than falling for the illusion of dominance and money and fame and power.
Russ, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
Thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.